Greg, you started your career working on the documentary Pins with Garth Davis, so when he calls, do you give him first priority?
Of course. Garth's one of my oldest friends, so whenever Garth calls, I know that what he's going to be working on is going to be very interesting and something that would interest me. So, you know, I've worked with Garth probably longer than I've worked with anybody else in the world, and I've known Garth probably longer than anybody else other than my family. So, so I understand the way he works. I understand his methodology. So, you know, he and I are quite in tune when it comes to things we like. So, chances are, if he's interested in something, the chances are I'll probably like it.
Garth, how was this project presented to you for Lion?
I was at Sundance Film Festival with Top of the Lake, actually, and the producers of that, Ian Canning and Emil Sherman, and I were just getting together, and they had just read this article about Saru's story. It just come out, and they just said, "Oh my God, this is so you, Garth. You should read it." So I raced up to my lodge and I read the article and totally fell in love with Saru's story. I said, "Guys, this is fantastic." So they said, "Okay, well, we'll go and try and get the rights to it." And so the next day they started trying to find out who had the rights to his story, and I think about a month later, Emil had secured the rights to the project, and we started getting into it.
So had you read his book in the meantime?
The book hadn't come out at all, so this is very early on. So it was just it was an article in the press that had come out when Saru had just found his mother. So that's all we had read. So when we got the rights, we started to research the project. His book came out somewhere along the line after that.
Luke, was Lion a writing assignment for you? How were you pitched the screenplay?
I had a previous relationship with the producers, Seesaw Films, because one of those producers, Emil Sherman, had produced a film that I wrote, Candy, with Heath Ledger 10 years earlier. So we had a prior relationship, basically, and a professional, and an affection and a respect and friendship. So they came to me, "Here's this book, what do you think?" That was how it happened. And I read this book and I was like, what do I think? This is like a beautiful fairy tale with elements of nightmare and redemptive qualities. It's like a myth, and like what I think is I really hope that I get this job. I'm going to try and write a structure, and I hope I'm the one you guys want, and I got it. And then it was really fast. "Luke, congratulations, you got the job. Jump on a plane. Saru's in India. You're going to India. He's going to show you all the real places where everything happened. The train station, the orphanage, his hometown, the dam, the station, the platform, the rain tank, and most of all, I met his mother, his biological mother, and spent a few hours with her, which was an extraordinary experience."
So you'd never heard of the book or Saru's story previously?
Well, by coincidence, the book came out. When the book came out, there were articles about it online, and in the 4 days or so before that phone call, when they said, "Can you check this book and tell us what you think?" I had read the story. So there was this tiny little moment where I said, "Oh, I read about that this week. That's kind of an amazing story." The Google Earth thing. So it was this really vague thing where I had glanced at something that was kind of just this viral like thing that you glance at like, that's kind of cool. And then 4 days later they were like, "We've got this book. You know about this story?" So yeah, I knew about it this much.
And then at what point are you actually sitting down, meeting Saru, maybe even going to India?
So as soon as we got the rights, the first thing I said is I need to go to India and start retracing his steps and feeling his story. And coincidentally at the time, Australian 60 Minutes was doing an article on Saru, and they were taking the adoptive mother, Sue, to meet the birth mother, Kamala, for the first time. So I was there when they were filming that, and that was my first day in my research trip. So I was suddenly kind of thrust very deeply into this family's life and experience, and kind of saw some crazy things. It was amazing. So that was my first day in the research, and then from that point on I kind of retraced young Saru's journey. I went on some trains, I went to Calcutta, went to the orphanages, I wandered around the streets at night imagining what it would be like for him to be living on these streets. I mean, I have children myself, so that whole journey for me was very impactful. And then I went to Hobart and met all of his contemporary friends, hung out with John, Saru's father, and just try to immerse myself in their life as much as possible.
And what time frame is that you're actually kind of sinking in Saru's world?
Oh God, look, I probably spent, I think the trip was like 3 weeks, probably, and then I would continue on with conversations and phone calls, Skypes, and then I would revisit some of these places again as well.
Okay. And then you somehow presented this idea to Luke, or how did this come
Yeah,
about?
so I started the research trip, and then the three of us, Amelia and myself, we started to look at different writers, and we all really loved Luke, and so we engaged with Luke, and at a certain point he became officially engaged with the project, and then we quickly sent him on the same trip I did, so at least we could be on the same page when we got together to talk about the film.
So when you meet someone that you'll be essentially duplicating their life on screen, and I'm sure all the pressures that go along with that, what questions are you asking them, or are you merely just observing them?
It wasn't like I had a prepared set list of questions, like, so I'm about to sort of rape and pillage your life and steal your psyche and do this thing. But it also wasn't like observational. It was like it was like a really interesting, intense 2 or 3 week research trip where I spent a week and a half with him going around India, and then we flew to Tasmania, and I met his adoptive parents and the places that he grew up in, Hobart and so on. So it wasn't just observational, it was actually just a lot of downtime where you're just getting to know someone and interacting. I mean, it literally became like, okay, so I'll see you here for breakfast. Or like, so you want to meet down here for dinner? All the downtime things between the scheduled stuff, which was like, so tomorrow we're going on the train from here to see what the trains are like, and then we're going to the orphanage and we're doing this. That was all very, but the other thing was just pleasantly getting to know this guy who's really, he's an unusually self-possessed guy. You know, I think the vast majority of us are on some sort of scale where we like to be liked, we like to get on with other people, and we have social contracts about how we behave and so on. Saru is weirdly, like, you can really tell he doesn't care what other people think about him. And I think that's because he had such a 1 in a zillion extraordinary experience of compressed trauma at an age where it shouldn't have happened to anyone, that it turned him into a certain kind of human being that has this self-contained thing and doesn't need the approval of other in order to sort of survive his inner life. But the really interesting thing is that whenever he's with Sue, this is my observation, his mother, his adoptive mother, it's like a lock that opens this door where he's closer to that vulnerable, bewildered, frightened 5-year-old boy. So it's kind of like he grew up, he only had 5 years in India. Then he became a really Aussie guy. Some of that means you're a bit of a lad, a bit shut down, Australian males, you know, like not too in touch with your emotions or whatever. And he's a little bit of that, but he's also a guy who had one of the most emotional sort of mythic stories that you could experience. So he's got all that within him. And his beautiful adoptive mother, Sue, is like the doorway to that, where you see Saru change when he's with her, because I think she's just so deeply part of the journey of where he came from and where he got to.
When you're making a film about someone's life and you've met this person, you've met their family, you've traveled to their homeland, how much pressure or responsibility do you feel?
Huge amounts. Yeah, I did a documentary once in my early years, and really felt that responsibility in a visceral way. And I mean, you know, it's something I'm very conscious of, and so, you know, that's why I really did have to spend a lot of time. And I think I said to Sue, look, maybe we're not going to get the story perfectly right like a documentary, you know, because you just can't, you know, it's kind of a compressed version of it. But I hope that I get it emotionally right for you, and I hope that you feel proud about the message that comes out of it, out of your story, because that's really what I was hoping to get out of it. So it kind of simplifies what you're trying to represent for them. So yeah, but it's a huge responsibility.
How many people have you met that have been similar like that in terms of self-contained, that you can just tell they're almost their own island when they're in a public setting?
I've met no one like Saru. There's something really unusual about his bearing, and I don't mean he's cut off. He's really friendly. He's really funny. He's He's full of one-liners. He's a very wry observer of human foibles. He's extremely charming. He's like, he just, you know, he can sweep the ladies off their feet. You know what I mean? These are interesting qualities. He came out of this place that was pure survival and peril. You know, he's spoken about that. People ask him about his emotions as a 5-year-old. He's like, wait, emotions were a luxury for that period of time. I had to have a hide as thick as an elephant hide, skin. And what was going on was second by second, black and white, yes, no, left, right decisions. Emotions were like far, far away in that situation. So I think some of his journey was about suppressing the trauma of that, and then for 25 years, because he landed in this beautiful deal with these beautiful people, and John and Sue are beautiful people. They always had the vision, there are enough children suffering in the world, we're going to adopt children, we're not going to have our own children. That was like their vision in life, and they stuck to it. And so Saru had that in his background, and so he kept it a secret that all those years he dreamed every night. He imagined kind of like astral traveling back to India to get back to his mother and brother and to say, I'm here, I'm sorry I got lost, you know. Just to say those words, I'm sorry I got lost, it's so touching because it wasn't his fault what happened. It's one of the things that makes the movie so intensely beautiful, because it wasn't his fault. He was just really vulnerable, and he made one single decision. He stepped on a train and a catastrophe began that completely changed his life. That ended up being okay, but it wasn't okay while it was happening. And so, yeah, that's part of what makes him so different from the rest of us.
Right, I've seen a few interviews and I definitely see that quality in him, and I would imagine he would be very good at sort of reading emotions, because that's probably at the base of it how he survived.
It's a survival skill.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've got to get really good at reading people. Such as the scene in the movie with the you know, who is that guy? Is he a child sex trafficker?
Right.
And Saru has said, maybe I'm wrong. I might have been misreading that situation, but I don't think so. And you're basically like, yeah, none of us think so either. You weren't misreading that situation.
Right, right. And the way you set it up too, because the woman was so, you thought, oh, he's finally found someone he can trust.
Yeah.
But I don't want to give away too much here.
Yeah.
The look of Lion is incredible, especially the opening shots. I mean, it really brings you into this like supernatural feel.
Mm-hmm.
How are you setting the tone in the beginning, knowing that there's various layers to the film, parts of the story?
The one thing that's beautiful about Lion, it's a very spiritual film. You know, the boy who becomes a man, at his essence, is a spiritual being that is constantly striving to get home. And one of the points that Garth raised when we first started speaking about this opening sequence was the story that Saru told Garth, which was often when he was a child, he would astral travel, or what he thought was that. He would, as he was going to bed, he would leave his body, he would float across Australia, float across the sea, and then go home in his body. Like, this is how every night he kind of imagined this would happen. And it wasn't until he discovered Google Maps, which became the physical, you know, incarnation of what he was trying to do, that he actually then realized he was onto something. But that opening sequence was effectively his spirit going home. You know, it starts in Tasmania and it travels across Australia, it goes across an ocean, lands in India, goes across India, train tracks, goes across landscapes, and then down into him. So it's him getting home. So in some ways you could believe it's, you know, it's his spirit beginning the movie, and it's a really lovely way to start the movie by his spirit beginning the film.
When you finally sat down to assemble the script, are you consulting with him, or is it becoming a finished product and then Saru, here you go, or none of that?
Yeah, it was more the latter. It was so that was really handy to meet him, to travel around with him, to get a sense of who he was. And then it was like, so now I'm in this place with Garth, and Garth and I came together. So now it's about your loyalty towards trying to create a film that is a rollicking good yarn, gripping, compelling. And yes, of course, at the same time, having a kind of moral and ethical duty towards the fact that you're dealing with real people's lives, very much still alive. But he wasn't part of that process then until it was like, here's the script. And what was really surprising was that his reaction was kind of like, oh, okay, cool. So this is what a script is like. That's interesting. I didn't know this is what a screenplay looks like. All these technical things that you got to work out. What does that mean? And exterior, day, all that technical stuff. He didn't actually have a lot to say about, well, that didn't happen, or that didn't happen, or I feel uncomfortable about that. There was very, very little. Sue, his mother, for example, said, oh, I thought you should have made the orphanage stuff darker. Oh, we thought the orphanage scenes were pretty damn dark. What's going on in there is, very troubling and unpleasant. Some aspects of it. Not Mrs. Sue, the wonderful lady who comes and rescues him, obviously. But no, Saru was just like, okay, I get it. Saru and his mum and dad, John and Sue, I mean, they were like, we understand that not everything's exactly like what happened, but we are completely touched by your capturing of the emotional truth of the story. And the stuff that we tweaked, they understood that too. They were learning about decisions you have to make in filmmaking. Okay, like for example, trivial level, in real life, Saru basically drove 3 girlfriends crazy in his 5-year search for home. We've got it's much better to have Rooney Mara, 1 character, not 3. We didn't need 3 girlfriends to sort of tell the same story. And he was like, okay. So that's the kind of thing you do in filmmaking decisions. That's cool.
And then in terms of actors, I know you'd said previously that there's so many great ones, but you wanted ones that you knew could carry the emotionality of so many of the scenes. Can you talk about what you were looking for specifically in terms of that emotion?
Well, first and foremost, I needed people to connect to the story in a way that I felt would honour the film. I mean, it's such an emotional film that no one can dial it in. Do you know what I mean? So, you might be presented with A-listers, but if they're not totally passionate about it, I don't want them. Do you know what I mean? So they had to be very passionate about the story. Each character had a different need. So for instance, what I loved about Nicole Kidman, for example, is that there's kind of a strength in Nicole Kidman that I saw in Sue. So there's a lot of similarities I could start to see emotionally. So I don't know, a lot of things started to become quite apparent to me when I was dreaming the characters and meeting the actors. It became quite obvious who was right.
What is it about the passion in an actor? How can you tell? Are there phrases? Is there body language? Just even when you know that they can nail the performance, but in terms of really being committed like that,
they just care about it. They can talk about it from their own point of view. They can own it. They can have an opinion. They're deep in the material. So that's really important. When I met Nicole in New York to talk about the role, she just spoke about it in such a deep way and how it related to her life, and imagine that, and we just had such a deep conversation. So that's a place you're starting from. I mean, of course the performances are going to be amazing, because we're going to go to such deep and honest places together. It's really important, I think.
How is the relationship with the subject, whether it's a documentary subject or an actor in a narrative, and the lens, especially in an intimate story like Lion? But then there's a lot of also wide shots. But how is that when you're trying to, let's say, get a teardrop? What is that like?
I mean, as a cinematographer or as a cameraman, you try to run the risk of you run the risk of the camera impeding what's going on. Now, in a documentary, definitely, because you don't ever want to stop something from happening that should happen, but you also don't want to be the cause of something to happen. So good documentary making is kind of riding that fine line between observing and not creating, but at the same time, where the line is a blur sometimes. With filmmaking, it's not dissimilar. Like, I was watching, we were at a Q&A last night, and I was actually with Dev in the green room, and we're watching the scene where he goes back and finds his mum in India. And I hadn't seen Dev for at least a year and a half actually. And I was like, dude, you remember that? That was like yesterday, but it felt so long ago, but it was like yesterday. Like I remember exactly, as he's walking, I'm walking with him, I'm walking back with him. I couldn't see his mum. That was a B camera, another camera, but I could see him. I wanted to get more into his eyes, but I didn't want to block his view of his mum. So it's this riding the fine line between being a passive observer, but also giving the audience what they need, which is seeing into his eyes, seeing the scene, seeing everything unfold. So trying to play that role is quite hard, but fun. I mean, it's fantastic. You know, we just shot something with Garth when we were in Italy, and I don't know, I remember as a camera operator just being completely magnetized by these actors. Like the camera couldn't not be on them. If it was on my shoulder or on my hip, it just like was like literally there was a homing beacon, just like following them everywhere they went.
And I understand that Sonny, this was one of his first acting roles at that time.
Well, yeah, he's
unbelievable.
He's just 5.
Oh
Yep.
my gosh.
Yep.
And so you saw how many children to find this
Thousands.
amazing boy?
We cast about 4 to 5 months in 3 cities in India, and then we would look at that. We'd look at those tapes coming in on Dropbox every week, and then we created a short list of maybe 100 to 200 children, and then a group of us went over to India and did these acting workshops for about a week or 2 weeks, just trying to find our kids.
So when you're on set for Lion, are you mostly working with the crew, or are you mostly working with the actors? Where's your attention mostly focused?
Well, it's kind of everything. The minute I arrive on set, you say good morning everyone, and the first place I go is the wardrobe truck. So the makeup truck. So I meet my actors in the morning, say good morning, and make sure that they're comfortable with the day ahead of them. And it's the first thing I do is say good morning to everybody. And then often the first hour of the morning you're with the crew because the actors are still preparing. So and then I sit with my DP. We have 10 minutes together. And I talk about, and the AD, and we just talk about the morning's work and what we're trying to achieve. And then we walk to set, and then we all go off independently and work with our crew. So there's definitely a rhythm that I have when I'm working that seems to have worked for me.
How many of the shots were handheld versus being...
I don't know the ratio, probably half, I'd say.
Wow.
But there were definite times that we wanted to stop the camera from being handheld. So there were definite times where his story slows, so the camera needs to slow. His story stops. He takes rest. He's taking in the world around him. So we needed to make sure that the camera slowed at that point as well. So that was a often used static camera, long lens, or dolly.
So you filmed in 2 countries, I believe. So Tasmania, which is an island in Australia.
Tasmania is the southernmost island off the bottom of Australia.
Okay, and then in India, was it Calcutta or
Yep,
whereabouts?
Calcutta.
Okay.
But we also filmed in Canberra, which is where he's from. So, the story takes place in 2 cities in India and 2 cities in Melbourne. That's Canberra and Calcutta, and Hobart and Melbourne. So we filmed in India between Calcutta and Canberra, and then we also filmed between Hobart and Melbourne.
Now, are you shooting a lot of it sort of in chronological order in terms of his life? I mean,
Pretty much. I mean, we shot India first, and then we shot Australia second. It was almost chronological. We shot in Calcutta, all the stuff in Calcutta first, and then we moved out to the villages. So it wasn't that linear. But I mean, Dev Patel's first scene was when he met his mother at the end of the movie.
oh wow, okay.
So there was very non-linear moments. But I think by shooting India first, we were able to learn a lot from that and take the textures and the colours and the visual language that we created there into the contemporary story. So I think it was great shooting India first.
So each day when you're reporting to set, how early is this that you're getting there, and what's that like?
Ooh, that's a good question. It varied depending on the day, because obviously there were some days that we needed to go into nighttime, and there were certain limits that you could only work with Sonny, of course, because he's a young boy, and not to mention us old timers having to get to bed early and stuff like that. So we needed to. That changed on a daily basis depending on what we were shooting.
First day of shooting, where was this?
The first week were night shoots with Sonny, 5-year-old Sonny, in the train station.
Okay.
So that woke me up.
The train scenes, can you talk about some of the technical aspects, how you lit the scene?
Well, filming on trains is very tricky because classically, they're very narrow carriages to walk in. They don't give you any more walkway than you need as a passenger. So to try and move up and down them is very hard. With a camera, it's very hard, particularly when you're slightly larger than your average Indian. Moving trains are difficult because they definitely throw the camera around a lot. So keeping a steady image is quite hard. We used a gimbal for a lot of the moving camera work in India. So we had an Arri M on the gimbal. So we had a great gimbal operator, Brett from Melbourne, come and join us in India, and he would basically just run with the boy. And the good thing about that gimbal was I could operate as well. So he could hold the camera in the right spot or move it, and then I could, with the wheels, I could pan and tilt and follow him. So it was the closest thing to having like a remote head, but on legs rather than a dolly or rather than a crane or a Russian arm. So
you start with the night shoots at the train station. And how was that, especially because Sonny's so young and this is one of his, it must have been overwhelming for him, this huge crew, or I don't know.
Yeah, it was, we're all just learning the language and learning how we all work together, so, you just stumble through it, and the minute you get it, like maybe you just find a moment that's really special, you just know that you're on the right path, and you just build upon those experiences and the confidence and the way you move together as a crew becomes easier, and so very quickly you just tune into what the film's going to be. But up until that point you're always imagining how it could be, and that's all hypothetical until you're literally making the thing. So the reality of working with a child, working in India, all that comes to a head at that moment, and so it's kind of terrifying and exciting at the same time.
We were asking Greg how it was to be there with this camera, and he said that actually most of the people around were used to productions being around there. Can you talk about maybe using some of the people that were maybe not extras, they were actual townspeople?
Yeah, look, I think Calcutta was easier to shoot in than, say, Mumbai, because they're just not, they're not as exposed to movies as people in Mumbai. So, they get curious, but a lot of the times they've got to catch the train, they've got to move on. So every 20 minutes you'd get a new wave of people. So if someone started to look, there's a certain point they've got to go and catch the train. So I don't know, it kind of worked for us. We would definitely have extras there that we would put into the foreground, and then have live crowds in the background, like the ticket box scene. We were, when he's being ignored and shoved out of the way when he's trying to ask for help, we controlled the first 3 or 4 ticket boxes, and then the rest down the end was just real tickets being sold. So because we're working in live locations, so we kind of got the scale that way, just working very cleverly within real spaces.
How was it in India filming when it seemed like there were people that were really from the town? These weren't actual extras. Yeah. And how were they in terms of seeing this machine, this thing that maybe they don't see every day? Or maybe they do.
Well, I don't know. People generally are very inquisitive in India. It's a vast generalization. Some people couldn't care that we were there, but some people were absolutely intrigued by this thing that we had. Everybody knows that the process of filmmaking. India makes more films, I think, than any other country on the planet. I think they're the most prolific when it comes to filmmaking. So to believe that people don't really know what's going on is kind of quite wrong, because everyone knows what's happening. Exactly the process of filmmaking, I think we're part of the entertainment. On the streets, we're part of the entertainment. If somebody was at the train station, they're maybe at the train station waiting for a train for hours. What else did they have to do? We were part of the sideshow. So trying to make sure that we were giving everybody the entertainment that they needed, but they weren't getting in the way, was part of the challenge for us.
What was the largest crew you were working with, and what location was that? In terms of Lion.
Yeah. The largest crew. Probably one of the biggest things we did in India was closing down the Howrah Bridge. So that's never been done before, and it's the sequence where little Saru escapes from the child snatchers and he runs out of the train station and emerges onto the bridge and is kind of overcome by the scale of the bridge. He's never seen anything like that before, and he's almost too afraid to cross it because of the scale of it, and he then goes to the side and sees the Baba shrine. So that bridge, we had to get permission to control that, so we obviously had to have a lot of traffic management at either end of the bridge. So that was probably the biggest logistical scene that we did. And then there were other times we were shooting something quite small, but we had thousands of people looking at us, and that kind of consumed a lot of resources, just trying to control the crowd as well. But it was a fairly simple shoot. Like, we didn't use any lighting, very small amounts of lighting. We shot with 2 cameras. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff.
Greg, can we talk about the lighting kit and how it varied from the train versus outdoors?
One of the challenging things on this movie, which is also one of the great things, was that we were quite limited in resources. You know, we went to India. We didn't want to carry around with us truckloads of equipment, because in the end it wouldn't actually have helped us to have, you know, hundreds of lights and the ability to light that. It would have actually slowed us down. So what I tried to do was, we tried to find locations that had a base level of natural light that looked really nice. We did carry some HMIs because we had a couple of scenes where we had HMIs come through windows, but for the most part we used LEDs. I had one Pelican case with 3 LED heads in it, and we lit predominantly most of India with 3 small LED heads.
So even the outdoor scenes, not just the train?
I mean, the outdoor scenes at night, yes, but the outdoor scenes during the day, I mean, it was rare. My style of lighting would rarely bring out lights for outdoors. I mean, it'd be very rare for me to do that. So no, I wouldn't pull LEDs out for the daytime. I'd go with natural light and then control the natural light.
How did you deal with sound?
It's a good question. Nakul, our sound recordist in India, I think was a bit of a genius. He may have even been nominated for an Oscar, I think, at some point. But he was just a wonderful sound recordist, and you'll even notice the actors, when they're in a scene, if they hear a train horn, they'll just pause and then they'll continue the line after the train. So, like, everyone's very aware of sound, but you couldn't hide from it. We had to do a lot of cleanup, but the sound recordist was very good. It's extremely good.
So that first shot of the day or night, but it's the first one that you've set up, how is that in terms of the last shot? Do you think that there's more fluidity toward the end and you feel more comfortable, or is it actually, are you sharper in the beginning?
No, I think if it's the first part of a sequence, it's always slower, because what you're trying to do is trying to work out what the sequence, how the sequence needs to take shape. So if that happens at the start of the day, or it happens at the end of the day, or towards the end of the day, I think they're pretty evenly paced. It's pretty traditional though for the bulk of the work to be done later, because I think there's just something kicks in when you're filmmakers and you go, well, we've only got 4 hours to go. We should really put on the gas. So I think your level of the amount that you achieve is a lot higher in the afternoon, or in the latter part of the day.
Had you talked to anyone else, or had you personally done any journey back home to confront any sort of memories or anything, and all that goes through that for someone? Because it's a different trip than someone who maybe has fond memories. It's much more emotional.
Yeah, well, the thing, it's a 1 in a million kind of story, because this hasn't happened to most of us. I have continuity from childhood with my parents and brothers and sisters and loved ones. That means there's not an unexplained emotional journey, if I've understood your question correctly, that I had to go back and experience. So I had to use my imagination. I just had to have my own memories, and interestingly enough, Google Earth going back to my childhood street was vividly incredible in terms of memories of being 5 years old. When we moved into that street, I was 3 years old, so I don't have memories of the house before that, from 0 to 3. I only have memories of that street, that house, and they're really, really vivid. And Google Earth was like, oh my God, that's the street, that's the curve, that's where we did that, that's where we played it, this and that. And I had to use the leaps of the imagination to think, man, at 5 years old, could I have done any of this? No food, no money, no clothes, no nothing, and in a world full of perils and predators. How the hell? And also, we live in us, you, me, everybody, we live in first world countries where if 5-year-old kids are wandering around the street distressed, it gets dealt with pretty quickly. This does not happen in India. There are bands of feral street kids, and if they try and harass any adults, they get battered away. It's the way of life, it's the chaos, it's the poverty, it's the extraordinary otherworldliness of India that is so not what we know, our privileged first world reality and sensibility. So the leap of the imagination into what that must have been like is immense. And for me, it's just hats off to Garth Davis, the director, because he made that leap. He brought it to life. It's like my script was just this way station at the beginning of the process. But to me, he did such a beautiful job that when I watch the movie now, even though I wrote it and I know what happens every second, I cry every time I watch it because I'm an observer of Garth's beautiful work of art, you know, and he created all these magic moments that took the leap of the imagination and make you feel what it's like to be in such danger and peril and trying to survive.
In terms of Google Earth, how familiar were you with it? I mean, I know it's been around, what, a decade, I guess, before actually delving into the shots and figuring out the older version of it?
Yeah, so Google Earth, I mean, I use all the time for location searching anyway in commercials, and so Google Earth is a tool that I use as much as I do with Microsoft Word. But you know, I think it's a risk having anything computerized in your movie. I mean, there's nothing more boring than looking at a mobile phone or a computer screen in a film. But I think in this instance, it was kind of really exciting to take the power of his past and his yearning and his all of that into these computer images, into Google Earth, and to see these maps passing through. So it suddenly became very loaded and interesting and haunting. And the fact that it was low resolution and it didn't work very fast, the texture of it for me was like memory. And so suddenly got quite excited about the software and how it became this strange window into his past. So it was a great challenge to kind of bring that software to life in a way that was meaningful.
So you're dealing with human beings, but then you're also dealing with Google Earth, which is in a completely other realm. How much research are you doing into Google Earth? How familiar had you already been with the program? Or?
I didn't personally have to. I was really familiar with the program when Google Earth came out. I too, like many people, went to my childhood home and worked out, and memories came flooding back. You know, that was the creek where I used to play with my brothers, and all these houses that used to be bushland and all of that. You know, I did that, and but so at a script writing level, what I knew was that we had this tale that felt like an ancient tale, like it felt like an ancient myth or an ancient fairy tale that goes back to the earliest origins of like human storytelling, like reunification with the lost mother. And yet, this was a story that in the whole history of human civilization could never have happened until 10 years ago, until Google released Google Earth. We wouldn't be sitting here right now if that app had not been released, because he could never have found home the way he did with these 4 or 5 or 6 visual memories that he needed to basically geolocate from space. And so to me it was like, oh my God, it's an old myth and a new myth. And so what a beautiful challenge to get that in there. And if we handle the first half of the film really well, if we're inside the reality and the distress and peril and bewilderment and fear and determination of this 5-year-old boy, then in the second half, when it gets more interior and psychologically, we're going to experience that as being exactly the same person on an unfinished, interrupted journey. The interruption happens to be 25 years, but we should be feeling like we're in the same person. And the technology, it's not like most films where technology is like logistical kind of plot development stuff. The liberation for us was that we knew that the technological stuff, the Google Earth stuff, is part of the emotional journey. So that you, hopefully the audience, you're feeling it in your gut basically. But at the level of research, I didn't have to do much. I just tried to write the Google stuff poetically this is what he's seeing on screen, this is what he's seeing on screen, this is what he's seeing on screen, because I trusted that Seesaw's a great company and that they'll work out the tech details properly. And what happened was they had very little to do with Google Earth, except that the Google Earth coding guys helped make the Google screen stuff completely authentic and period authentic from the actual times that Saru was searching. So they went in, this guy described it to me, we went to Google headquarters, all of us, it was a really fun day, and he described it as the archaeology of the coding. They had to go in like archaeologists to the coding of the earlier versions of Google, and they weren't sure if they would succeed in properly recreating what Google Earth was like at any given time. And they got it down to fine detail. They worked out the timelines of when Saru was looking at. So if you're a tech geek, it's completely authentic. Every single time you see Google Earth on screen in the film, it tracks the time of when Saru was actually searching the stuff. In the very beginning, it's the super slow buffering speeds. You remember the frustrations of the early days of Google Earth. Now it's great. And it was the low resolution when you zoom down to the low levels and so on. So they recreated that. It's kind of cool. Like, it's cool in a sort of, if you need to know the tech stuff way.
Right.
It's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. With the Google Earth shots, were those actual shots that you're filming from a computer screen? Or?
At times, yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep, at times. We, I think there was some computer generated shots at times, but I think for the most part we were trying to film off a computer screen. Because it's just, we wanted to give it texture. We wanted to make sure there was texture, reflections, like we wanted it not to be a flat kind of, like info doco that, okay, he looks at this, then he looks at here, then he looks here. It wasn't about that, it's about the emotions. So trying to link that with him was really important. Trying to see reflections, trying to see his face through reflections, trying to see the screen change light on his face, in his eyes, in his tears. Like, there was some beautiful moments where we had some great reflections in a tear. I remember watching it, like we had a close up in his eyes, and a tear ran down. And I went, oh, I saw the map. I saw the map in his tear.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that was great too. Yeah, seeing him with the laptop but how is that in terms of the technical? The lens picking up the screen. Because I know maybe in the olden days you would definitely see like this sort
the bars,
of...
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because there are different monitors, CRT monitors that refresh. I think LCDs or LED monitors don't refresh anymore. I think I'm not that techie when it comes to that, but I know that traditionally laptop monitors I've rarely had a problem with.
Did you take any train rides, either by yourself in India or with the masses, as we see in one scene where it just looks overwhelming?
Yeah, well, I did. We went to Howrah station, the main station where Saru got spat out in Calcutta, and that was amazing for research. Also, that's the station where they shot all the scenes, so the real place is the place where it really happened. Up in Madhya Pradesh province, the home village, we went on like a 4-hour train ride and back, just to get a sense, just for my research. It was like I wanted to get a sense of the chaos of the trains and the seating arrangements and the structures, just to help with basic technical stuff of how to write what's going on in the trains and what's going on the stations. And the fundamental thing of any travel experience in India, if you've been there, is that it is exhausting. Every single thing is so kind of chaotic, and I mean, maybe I'm sounding like a wimp here, but traveling in India is both exhilarating and exhausting at every single level, from the smallest detail to the largest.
At the end of the day, which scene of Lion are you most proud of? So many beautiful scenes, and it's such a journey. But
look, I do love the scene with Sue and Saru, just the two-hander, where she talks about the vision of the ghost and how she could have had children. I just thought that was, when I was filming that, I was unaware of where I was. I was so, I was lost in her performance. So that's pretty exciting when that happens.